Hello everyone. Congratulations on the 30th anniversary of GDC this year.
What's awesome about GDC is it's just this gathering of the tribes. Everyone who wants to make games in the world comes to San Francisco this week if they can.
For GDC's 30th anniversary, I made a list of why I personally like the show from A to Z. So here we go.
GDC means a lot to me. When I first started in this business over 20 years ago and I'd go to the parties, I was the wallflower over in the corner, didn't know how to say hi to anybody. And flash forward to 20 years later where I'm on a hugging basis with almost everybody that I know.
For me, GDC has been pretty instrumental for me, growing as a developer and coming up, just even simply going there to hang out with people that you see once a year and just sharing your games with them, sharing your design ideas, or just sharing philosophical ideas.
The show is a valuable opportunity for us to meet and exchange ideas with so many game developers, all who share our passion for making great games and advancing the medium.
Congratulations, GDC。私はパックマンの生みの親、岩谷徹です。その後パックマンも成長してピクセルという映画になりました。私も、手が食べられそうになりましたけれども、大丈夫、手があります。
I would like to congratulate GDC on its 30th year anniversary and to thank everyone at GDC for all the friends that I've made since I started coming to it 3 years ago.
My very first one was in 2000 when I was interviewing for my very first job on Civilization 3. Since then, I've been to 13 more, and I always tell everyone it's my favorite week of the year.
Advocacy, business, creativity.
The real power of GDC is the sessions, of course, but even more, it's the friends you make, the arguments you have late into the night about what games can and should be. It's about meeting your heroes, which can be overwhelming, but also a lot of fun.
I always leave feeling inspired by the creative people that come together for the excellent talks, the brilliant discussions and arguments, and of course the amazing demos.
GDC の一番の思い出はやはりライフタイムアチーブメント賞をいただいた時のことかと思います。ライフタイムアチーブメントをいただいた時にみんなからこの賞は業界に長くいたおじいちゃんみたいな人がもらうような賞なのでこんなに若くしてもらえたなんてすごいねと言われたのがとっても思い出深いです。
I got so much from the GDC community that I wanted to find a way to give back a lot more. This is actually more than a community that GDC has created. I feel it is a family.
And the great thing about GDC is you could come into GDC totally jaded, totally burned out. You have 2 or 3 conversations and you go home and you're just like, I want to make games, that was awesome. It just really reinforces what the game industry is all about.
On behalf of everyone at Nintendo, thanks for all the great work you do, GDC.
Alan, Kathy, Jamil, Megan, and so many others, thanks for keeping the flame burning.
Congratulations, GDC. Here's to another 30 years.
GDC 30周年おめでとうございます。
Winners, excitement, you, and a zillion other things that just make it a great time. Thanks for being awesome.
It's really happy to celebrate GDC 30 years. See you in San Francisco soon.
Congratulations, GDC, on your 30th anniversary.
ぜひ皆さんも頑張ってください。
Let's enjoy the GDC. Congratulations.
Congratulations again, GDC, and everyone in this industry for celebrating this memorable year.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the General Manager of GDC, Megan Scavio.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 30th edition of GDC. We're going to celebrate this morning with a retrospective of the last 30 years of making games. So travel back in time and welcome the founder of the Computer Game Developers Conference, Chris Crawford.
I get to look taller. Wow, that's great. Okay, what I'd like to do today is to give you guys an idea of just how bad it was 28 years ago. I mean, those really were the good old days. That's me on the left there. back then, let me start by comparing the types of machines we had back then. Back then I was using a Mac 2X. Nowadays I use an iMac. Let's compare these two. We'll start with processing power, which you can estimate by counting the number of transistors on the CPU. The Mac 2X had a 68020 and with 190,000 transistors. The iMac has 1 billion transistors on it. That's 5,000 times more processing power. And then clock speed, Mac Hertz ran at a blazing 30 megahertz. 2.6 gigs for the iMac, that's 87 times faster, or to put it another way, imagine playing a current game 87 times slower, and you'll get a feel for what it was like in those days. RAM, the Mac 2X had 4 megabytes of RAM. My iMac has 8 gigs, that's 2,000 times more memory. Hard drive, it had a 40 megabyte drive, which I upgraded to an 80 megabyte drive, and so I called my computer ADIE, spelled A-D-I-E. My wife thought I had a mistress. And the iMac is 1 terabyte, that's 25,000 times more hard drive space. And then here's a comparison on the same scale of the screen sizes. You can see an iPhone has a lot more screen space than the Mac 2X had. We really had to fight to squeeze everything onto this tiny little 640 by 480 by 8-bit machine. And then price, this will really surprise you. In constant dollars, adjusted for inflation, the Mac 2X cost $11,000. The iMac cost $1,800. That's just 1/6 of what the 2X cost. You had to make a considerable financial investment in those days to get into the business. Nowadays, every high school kid has a computer powerful enough to do the job. Here's some of the graphics we had back then. You guys call this retro graphics. We call it cutting edge. And now let's compare market sizes. Installed bases for desktops. There were about 100 million desktops installed back then. Nowadays there are 1 billion. That's a market 10 times bigger. Consoles, 62 million consoles then. 600 million now. Again, the market is 10 times bigger. But those are the only markets that existed back then. You guys have markets like tablets, which back then existed only on Star Trek. Nowadays, we got 36 million of them. And then there's smartphones. Even Star Trek didn't have smartphones. But nowadays, we got 2.5 billion of these babies installed. And then internet, yes, we did have the internet. No, we did not have the web. It was not invented then. But back then there were 330,000 hosts. Nowadays there are 1 billion. So I think you can see how much this industry has changed. You guys live in a completely different universe than the one I lived in when I founded this conference. However, I can reassure you that there is one thing, one constant in this industry, one rock of stability that will never change, and that is my popularity. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lorianne Cole, and I'm here to talk about the history of adventure games. Adventure games are interactive storytelling through exploration and puzzle solving. They involve usually a third-person character that you've maneuvered across the screen. You had interaction with the environment and with other non-player characters. It always involved puzzle solving of some sort and decision making. The first adventure game was Adventure. This was the paragraph that woke people's imaginations and created a world that people could get involved in and created the game industry. Infocom was the first to take it and run. It had games like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, written by Douglas Adams, and it had imaginary worlds that you traveled to along with your companion, Floyd the robot. The first graphic adventure was invented by Roberta Williams, and she and her husband formed the company Sierra Online. Sierra Online took the games to many different worlds and many different places. It was the first games to have female protagonists. It started to attract a large female audience, and it had female game designers. The King's Quest was the game that everybody played if they played an adventure game at this period of time. Space Quest brought snarky humor in a science fiction setting. Leisure Suit Larry brought naughty humor and adventure with amusing death sequences. Quest for Glory was a game I helped create, and it involved role-playing into the adventure game market. And then Gabriel Knight by Jane Jensen brought the horror and the mystery back into the game. However, LucasArts formed, and it stole the adventure game crown away from Sierra with wildly inventive games with a de-emphasis on the death and dying and an emphasis on fair puzzles. Monkey Island allowed the players to become a wannabe pirate. The Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis was a brilliant game which really allowed you to experience what it's like to be in the adventure story of a movie. Day of the Tentacle brought very, very wacky humor and wacky art style to entertain people. And Grim Fandango brought the world of the Day of the Dead with film noir, and it was the last adventure game for LucasArts. And that, they said, was the death of adventure games. Adventure games were too expensive. They were too labor-intensive because you had to craft every article and every item of the game. They were designer-centric because you'll see most of these things, most of the games I've listed here have a strong authorial value and a designer that really controlled the team and controlled the fate of the game rather than a committee. They were very cerebral rather than visceral, and they did not appeal to that mass market that we all wanted to reach out there. The appeal of adventure games, though, was the multiple genres. You could cover cyberpunk to romance. It had strong emotional appeal. It had a lot of humor. It had a lot of, it could have horror. It could have poignancy. And the impact of adventure games is that it required problem-solving skills. It taught that persistence is a virtue. The only way to lose is to quit, and that mistakes are no big deal. Adventure games, though, didn't really go away. While the modern publishers don't touch them right now, smaller companies have continued to keep the genre alive. And Kickstarter came up to give fans a chance to support the games they wanted to see. Telltale continues to this day to create episodic adventure games with some of the biggest brands on the market. The designers from that 90s period continued to create games and that are award-winning and well-received in the world of things. And Broken Age, of course, is one of the biggest Kickstarter projects that ever was out there. And it has created a documentation process of just how chaotic and wild it is to create an adventure game. Thimbleweed Park brings Ron Gilbert back to the game thing, and this is a game coming out this year, and it's giving the flavor of the 90s back to the adventure game field. And we're creating Hero U Rogue to Redemption, which again connects the vision of adventure games with the role-playing experience. So yes, indeed, adventure games are alive and well, and they're still very fun to play. Thank you.
Good morning. I think my first GDC was 1990, and back then you used an operating system called MS-DOS to boot up your computer. And your computer booted really fast, that was true. But it came up with this thing called a C prompt. And the C prompt you had to type stuff. It was kind of like an adventure game. For a lot of you, we just typed win, and then we go to Windows and there'd be icons and stuff. But games were not really installed that way still. Games were installed on floppy disks, and it had setup, and it had all these things. And so MS-DOS was a huge barrier to entry for mass market acceptance. Our big hope was this operating system, OS/2, was going to save us all. OS/2 from IBM was the next big thing. It had a great API. It was going to have multi-threading built in, great foundation, good OS, no drivers. So if you didn't have an IBM PC made by IBM, it didn't run. So it failed, and we all have Windows. So you used to install games with floppy disks, and this is 720K floppy disks. There was 5.25-inch floppy disks too, and you'd have 22 of them to go install before you actually could get to play the game. You'd put the first floppy disk in, type A:, go to setup, and then it would chunk away for a little while, and it would chunk because those floppy disk drives make noises. And you would install your game, and it would go somewhere on your hard drive, and you had to go find it and type, go. It took a long time. This is how we got online to the internet, using something called a landline. And you get online with Prodigy, with Genie, or with CompuServe. And CompuServe, you had to remember the number was your ID. And you'd get online, and there was no vast information, there was no Wikipedia, there was no way to go get stuff. You could email and go get a little bit, but that was about it. So CD-ROM offered vast possibilities for everyone. It was kind of like, we're going to get the encyclopedia built into every single home. We're going to have offline internet availability to everyone. And when CD-ROM was first invented, the thought was, it's going to be vast amount of text we can put on this sucker. And some images maybe. And it wasn't really what we were looking forward to. It was not the CD-ROMs yet of that we thought of to install games, until we came up with a standard called the Multimedia PC Standard, which was set a standard out for computers to actually play games and have CD-ROMs which had multimedia. The thought of multimedia was still not interactive. It was still text and graphics and sound, but not really all together. But the specs on this sucker, sorry, the picture's small, but were actually pretty darn incredible for the time. It was a 386SX CPU, which didn't have a macro processor running at all of 16 megahertz. My watch is more than that. 2 megabytes of RAM, 30 megabytes of hard drive, a 640 by 480 screen with 256 colors, which you couldn't even address all at once with that 386 processor. It was banked RAM. You actually had to change the banks to go and actually address the thing one at a time. You had a 1x single-speed CD-ROM drive, which goes at 150K a second. The kicker is it could use 40% of that CPU. So you were left with about 12 megahertz of CPU that on a 386 that you could actually do stuff with. Blazing fast. We had, for the first time, the ability to play digital sound, 8 bits, 22 kilohertz. Boy, we could have people talking in games. It was going to be awesome. Couldn't tell where they were from, who they were, but you could. And Windows 3 with multimedia extensions, which really meant Windows booted up and made a sound. And it came on CD-ROM to install. So this meant all of a sudden you could get that encyclopedia. This was the big thing that everyone saw. You go into software, etc., and this is what was lining the shelves. It was Encyclopedia Britannica, Random House, Webster's, all those things. That was the thing that came out. And Rob Landeris and I went to the multimedia conference, and we looked at all of this, and we thought about it, and we thought, what does this mean? And here's me trying to install stuff. I had short hair back then. My daughter's doing the installing. But Rob Landeros and I went to a conference and we thought, wow, we can do so much more with this. We can do something incredible. And at the time on TV, there was a show called Twin Peaks, which we were big fans of. And we were big fans of Clue and CD-ROM, puzzle games, actors in games, and video. And we thought, we can put all of these things together. Let's do that. So Rob and I, along with Rand and Robin Miller, who we don't actually dislike, I've never actually met them. Everyone thinks there's a huge rivalry between us. I'd love to have dinner with them. Made 2 games. We made The Seventh Guest, and we made Myst. And between those games, we kickstarted the CD-ROM industry and getting CD-ROMs into homes everywhere with over millions and millions of units sold. And we changed the world. Thank you.
Very good morning. Don't you love the smell of nostalgia? It's great. It smells like history. So in 1990-something, the console industry was dominated by Sega and Nintendo. They were the console powerhouses that really ran the TV-based game industry. The man on the left is Ken Kutaragi. He designed the sound chip for the Super Nintendo, which was an amazing sound chip. I don't know if you remember hearing those games for the first time with that sound chip. It was incredible. And that started a relationship between Sony and Nintendo that actually created a joint venture for the original PlayStation. Now, this never actually came out to the market. 200 units were built. I'm not going to talk about the history of this, but if you're interested in it, you can find plenty of places online that will talk about it in more detail. But after that relationship broke down, we were inspired by Ken to think about how ways that we could take workstation quality 3D graphics using silicon graphics type workstations and movies like The Lawnmower Man, and combining that with the CD technology that you've just heard Graham talking about, using the rapid manufacturing times to reduce the cost. Remember, cartridges back in those days cost $15 each, and they took 6 to 7 weeks to ship from Japan. It was a really tough business to be in creatively and commercially. It made no sense, in fact, unless you were doing movie licenses, sports games, or you were one of the first parties. It was really hard to innovate. And we took those things together and we built PlayStation, and an incredible team of people in Japan took all of this amazing hardware and we built some demos. This is actually a video of the original demos that we showed to developers back in 1993. We had some really incredible sprite technology. Sadly, the frame rate on this video is not as high as it was, obviously, in those days. But this was state-of-the-art in terms of real-time 3D computer graphics. Circa 93, we did our first developer engagement in the fall of winter of 93. And then in the January of 94, we went to Vegas, and we thought, great, CES in Vegas. So we went to the only hotel in Vegas without a casino, which is the Alexis Park Hotel. Thankfully, it eventually went out of business. And we met with hundreds and hundreds of developers here in the US to show them what the PlayStation was capable of, and to get their feedback and to get their ideas as to what they would really like in the system. As a result of meetings in Vegas in 94, we actually doubled the memory of PlayStation 1 from 1 megabyte to 2 megabytes because we realized just how much better games could be. The guy in the middle with the hat on is Terry Tokanaka. He was to become the first president of Sony Computer Entertainment, and he had a very simple vision for success in the video game industry. If we can be the creative choice of the game developers and the commercial choice of the game publishers, then we have a chance of success. And that mantra, that vision, is what then led us forward. We then built a demo in Japan, which was the dinosaur demo. Now, some of you may have seen this demo before, but this was pretty revolutionary, and it showed just what the power of 3D graphics would mean in a low-cost console device. It's amazing what you can find on the internet. Pretty much all the history is there. And then Sony Computer Entertainment, the company was formed, which is actually a joint venture originally a joint venture between Sony Corp in Japan and Sony Music Entertainment Japan. And those two cultures, engineering and production on one side and entertainment and marketing and creativity on the other, brought together to build what I believe was an incredibly unique culture and a phenomenal team. I spent 16 years at Sony Computer Entertainment, and it was an amazing experience working with some of the smartest and greatest people I've ever had the privilege of working with. We then built the first PlayStation 1. We spent $50 million in R&D to build PlayStation. Now, if you think about the return on investment of that, that's a pretty amazing ROI. We got to tens of billions of value created through that one product. And then the final hardware shipped in Japan in '94. The name PlayStation, funnily enough, was contentious. Here in the US, they wanted to call it PSX because they didn't think PlayStation was cool enough. Terry Tokonaka said, well, that's nothing. You should have heard what people said about Walkman before we introduced Walkman. For those of you under the age of about 25, a Walkman is like an iPhone with a cassette tape in it. That sound still makes my, hairs on my arm. It's a great sound, and that was the launch sound of PlayStation when you switched it on. Then there was some ton of games, some incredible games like Ridge Racer, Wipeout, where we put licensed music soundtrack into games. It wasn't the first game to do it, but I think it was the first time that it had been done in a really cool and credible way. Games like Wipeout had very cool and sophisticated advertising. That's youth marketing on the right. Final Fantasy VII, a huge hit from Square, obviously. An NFL superstar of the time phoned up our office and said, hey, can I get a copy of that Final Fantasy VII? I have no idea what he thought he was getting, but anyway. Obviously, Crash Bandicoot from Naughty Dog. We had a lot of hardware innovation, a train driving simulator controller from Japan. Sold 300,000 units at $100 a pop, so it was pretty popular. Obviously, Gran Turismo. And then Parappa the Rapper is a game which I think would be a challenge to have this pitch for this game today. The player takes on the role of a paper-thin rapping dog who is trying to win the heart of a flower-like girl named Sunny Funny. Now, if you were the publisher or developer pitching that, can you imagine the pitch and the publisher going, well, it's not really exactly core market, but at least I hope the developer is experienced, to which you would say, no, he's never written a game before in his life, he's a Japanese pop star. And then Tomb Raider really pushing out the boundaries and starting to put games into mass culture for the first time. And that is one of the legacies of PlayStation, I think, is taking PlayStation into cool areas. We put PlayStations in nightclubs. This is cool people having fun in a nightclub. We had some parties where some interesting people showed up. That was one of the more surreal afternoons of my life. And it was this great moment in time where the cost of development and the market opportunity were nicely aligned. And it allowed creativity to really expand. We then had PlayStation for consumers to develop games with Net Eurose. I would love it if there was somebody here in the audience who got a job through Net Eurose. Yes, fantastic, that's great to hear, congratulations. And then we launched PlayStation 2, which kind of took it even bigger and better. The cool thing about the dev kit was everybody said how much they liked the blue LEDs, which was interesting. And then there was lots of hardware that came after it. But I think the legacy of PlayStation is combining that moment of creativity and innovation and turning games into something that was a legitimate mass market entertainment product for us all to enjoy, none of which would have been possible without the amazing creativity of people in this room. So for that, I thank you. Thanks very much.
Hello. It started, as many things do, in the mud. Created by Roy Trubshaw and Richard Bartle in 1978, it was the first of the text worlds, alternate realities simulated on computers that hundreds of people could connect to at once. A world where the very design was intended as a blow against class structures and rigid identity, Mud allowed people to choose their own genders, to become wizards even if their accent was from the wrong part of the country. But virtual worlds were too powerful an idea to be invented only once. By 1985, video game developers had invented them again on a Commodore 64 and given us the modern meaning of the word avatar. By 1989, virtual worlds had sprung up in the thousands, a whole galaxy of children of Mud. They were run by students stealing CPU from pricey Unix workstations. They were banned in Australia. Some few, led by pioneers at various companies with names like Kesmai, Mythic, Simutronics, had become commercial endeavors. By 1990, virtual worlds had split into camps that live on today. We began to confront the issues of online governance. Who gets a vote in how a world runs? Who has privacy online? And who watches the watchmen? The famous rape in cyberspace case took place on Lambdamu. Virtual conflicts moved to the real world in the earliest forms of doxing. By 1993 to 1995, pictures had arrived on the web thanks to Mosaic. And around the world, projects were initiated within a few months of one another, caught up in the dream of bringing visuals to virtual worlds. Some took longer to build than others. Worlds for building, worlds for roleplay, worlds for furries, worlds where you walked through dreams, with release dates scattered through the second half of the 90s. And of course, the first world in a box. And after what were termed the Big Three: Ultima Online, EverQuest, and Asheron's Call. The thing to realize is that we all knew each other. We'd played together on the MUDs. We gave each other jobs. We hung out on a mailing list called MudDev and freely traded our design ideas, which were a tad too weird for GDC, so we made our own conference that we ran out of restaurants. The second floor of Il Fornaio in San Jose, in the middle of the sausages and the sauerkraut at Teske's Germania. When we came to GDC, we told people we weren't sure we were just making games. We built bugs by the tens of thousands. We tried to simulate ecologies and created environmental disasters. We built economies reading textbooks to master an impossible task because our worlds were vast experiments. Dark Age of Camelot, EVE Online, Star Wars Galaxies, Project Entropia. Many worlds were rough, implausible, buggy, and unfriendly. And in 2004, the game industry finally kicked us in the ass and brought us back to reality when Blizzard launched World of Warcraft. Polished, expert, slick, fun, it was the hack and slash game that nailed the form down and collapsed the possibility space. It was in some ways an end of history. The budgets and risk were high. The payoff, stratospheric. Hundreds of MMO projects were launched, and few made it. In its wake, the social worlds continued. Second Life enabling education, virtual concerts, and sex bots. Pretty soon, there were worlds for children. Not long after, there were worlds for teens. RuneScape became the gateway game for a whole generation of MMO players. And in Asia, MMOs became the default game-playing mode for quite some time, posting up stats that made observers incredulous. Today, titles like Star Wars: The Old Republic, Lord of the Rings, Elder Scrolls Online, and others have kept the torch alive. But in the end, MMOs moved out of the spotlight. We'd predicted as much. We said that someday we would give way to AR glasses and mirror worlds. MMOs gave you game guilds. MMOs gave you free to play. They gave you the profession that we now call community management. They birthed the farming game that became social gaming. Would there be Bitcoin today if it hadn't been for gold sellers? Because there sure wouldn't be Minecraft without mud. Aspects of MMOs even gave you Facebook itself, a world with no world there, one that maybe hasn't listened closely enough to the old lessons on player rights and governance. And what's Twitter but guild chat for the world? What's Facebook and LinkedIn but your character sheet, reinforcing rather than challenging notions of identity? We are all avatars now, but maybe our worlds are a little more mundane. Today is going to end with goggles and the promise of virtual being realer than ever. But today, all the console games are like MMOs writ small. Chat pop-ups as you're driving your car and hijacking a pedestrian, badges earned. We weren't wrong. MMOs did swallow everything, and maybe now you can't see them as clearly from inside the belly of the beast. As those of you working in VR charge off to build your worlds, I ask you to heed the lessons of your forebears. From whence you came, so shall you be. The future is still muddy. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. So I'd like to take you back 21 years to a city far, far away. The location is Dundee, Scotland, a small city with a population of about 150,000 people. Home to a game development company, an independent game developer company called DMA Design. And DMA was looking for its next game. It had thrived on innovation with games about things like small little green furry rodents and racing unicycles. It had a small design department, always playing with technology and ideas to find inspiration. Out of that department came a technique for adding depth to a potential top-down driving game. The camera could be low down, focusing on the car or the player. The camera could zoom out when driving through the streets, giving a great perspective to the driving. Zoom as you vroom, as we kind of christened it. We spent 8 weeks in design, looking at ideas, a long time back then. And from that, we came up with a completed 12-page design document. I managed to find the original one. Was born. So the DNA of GTA was really defined in those 12 pages. So we can take a look at some of the design highlights and see how they stood up. The first thing was it would be contemporary. Nothing for players to learn, everything relevant to today, everything familiar. Set in cities around the world we know, New York, Miami, Venice. Well, for most of you know, Venice never made it. No Americans in Venice, and they were the most fun to poke at. So it would be a contemporary racing game, something that was quite new back then. It would just be about racing, though. It would be about something completely new. You'll be able to get out of your car and steal another one. A very profound, simple statement, but one that had a big bearing on the game design. And not just cars, boats, helicopters, lorries, anything you wanted to steal. So not just about racing, a contemporary driving game. And it won't just be about driving, it'll be about missions, lots and lots of missions. So then it was a contemporary mission-based driving game. And with, of course, combat. When you're out of the car, on foot, you had to have fun then as well. So then it turned into a contemporary mission-based driving action game. And it was started in a huge city, a city where right from the start you could go anywhere you wanted. A contemporary open-world mission-based driving action game. And finally, it was to be in a living, breathing city, something very new. It would contain AI cars, traffic lights, signs, pedestrians, roadblocks. So really, it was a contemporary, open-world, mission-based driving action game set in a living, breathing city. And the rest of the say is history, apart from the small matter of actually having to make that bloody thing. And these are the 10 poor guys who had to make it originally. GTA's development was what I like to call open-world development. I actually think that's a good thing. It's structured. Some people maybe argued not. With a 12-page design document, it had to be. So it was a bottom-up design, highly iterative, and really driven by what we were having fun day-to-day with during the development. A large emphasis was on the city itself. It was a simulation, one the players could go in and screw with. It was about giving players freedom for the first time, a sandbox, and that's where that term kind of came from. There were, of course, big concerns about this. Games tended to be very direct experience. They were usually linear, levels to progress through, fixed paths to follow. Here was a game where in the first 10 seconds, every player's own experience could diverge. It was both exciting, but at the same time very scary. But it was something that was very unique to our medium at that time. Unlike movies, books, music, every player could enjoy the experience unique to them, not the way the director or the creator forced upon them. So when creating an open world game, it's hard to know when there is enough to deliver on that promise. What would make it a truly living, breathing world? With GTA, there was a deep passion within the team to ensure that we fully met that. The more the game could free the player up to carry on the actions they wanted, the more the game felt truly, truly alive. So during development, it became more of a big question about what if? What if I could do this? What if I could do that? But even the smallest actions could have massive consequences. Let's take something as simple as adding an ambulance to the simulation. You know, if I pull out a gun and shoot a pedestrian, I would fully expect an ambulance to turn up. But at the same time, you know, maybe the police were dispatched. So I was standing there, the ambulance turned up, you know, the medics got out to pick up the body, and you think, oh, I could steal that ambulance. So you jump in. And if I'm driving the ambulance, what if I can switch the siren on? Because ambulances have sirens, right? So that would be pretty cool. And then what if I'm driving along, and now that all the AI should get out of my way? Hey, I'm driving an ambulance, you know, and I have my siren on, you should get out of the way. And then what if, as I'm forcing that traffic out of the way, it runs over more pedestrians? And then more police would come. And it was small, small things that led to, you know, very, very deep, you know, design considerations. So the team's reaction, you know, at that point was a WTF moment. Oh, you really want to make every game in one? And it was a big, big task and a big, big challenge. But welcome to the rabbit hole of open world game design, where compound interactions are really highly desirable, but highly challenging to develop. But ultimately, if you get it right, that's when magic happens. Open world games are like a chemistry set. It's fun to mix the ingredients in different ways, and hopefully the results the players get are satisfying, unique, and a lot of fun. GTA was and continues to be an exemplar for open world gaming experiences. It's now joined by many, many great other games, including Skyrim, The Witcher, Red Dead. For me, they are the pinnacle of gaming experiences. Something that really only our industry can deliver. We are the only medium that can deliver these kinds of experience, and we are the only industry that has the skills to deliver those experiences as well. I think we've only seen the tip of the iceberg for truly immersive open world experiences. New technology will take open world gaming to a whole new level over the next 25 years, and I, for one, remain truly excited about what the future holds. Thank you, and enjoy GDC.
Hello, giant crowded room. GDC 30. So I've been in the game industry for almost as long as the GDC. I've been lucky to be I've been to about 20 GDCs, but this is the first time I've been able to participate in a keynote. So it's quite an honor. I'm here to talk to you today about digital distribution. Very specifically about XBLA, I'll get to that in a second. Digital distribution, even before what we properly think of today as the internet existed, there were people playing Spaceball on PDP-1s when I was 2 years old in 1962, and they had to figure out how to get that to each other. We also had, way back when on the Spectrum, digital distribution was a magazine and people had to type in code. One of the ones that I was involved in as a hardcore gamer at the time was somebody, I was working at a studio at the time, they walked up, you need to play this, Doom. And of course I paid the reg fee because I was a good shareware user. But as I said, I'm here to talk today about Xbox Live Arcade. Now, Xbox Live Arcade actually started, we launched it in 2005 with the Xbox 360, but it really started in 2003. Jay Allard had a very hardcore fixation with arcade games, as did I. I love arcade games. Arcade games are great. You know, in fact, we had something in common in our love for this particular game, Robotron. So part of the goal that Jay wanted was, hey, what if you could just get Robotron on an Xbox 360 as is? Well, we sat down for lunch one day with a gentleman named Greg Canessa, who was the first person to run Xbox Live Arcade, Blake Fisher and myself, around, hey, what would you want if you want your cool all arcade games available on something like Xbox 360? Well, it's like, well, I want it to look perfect. I want it to be that. I want it to sound perfect. But I also wouldn't mind if we upgrade the graphics a little, and we were very much going after friends lists and all the stuff that happened with the Xbox 360. So another little thing we talked about was, wouldn't it be nice if we could just have the friends list as the thing that you were going after for the initial shot at a leaderboard? Well, you know, and again, here's what we did with Robotron. Looked like that. But I had a day job. So at the time, I was running one of two publishing studios inside of the Microsoft Game Studios. And these three games for day one of Xbox 360 were something that was my studio was responsible for. And those familiar with Project Gotham Racing 3 know that in Project Gotham Racing 2, there was a little arcade in the back of the garage. It had this game that I just loved playing called Geometry Wars. And I had just heard about XBLA about 2 weeks before one of those kind of trips where I go around in England go around England, visit all my developers. And so I was, Stephen Cakebread made Geometry Wars. Martin Chudley was running Bizarre Creations. I was like, hey, Martin, Stephen, maybe you should put it on this thing. And it's a story that would take more than the few minutes I have left. But let's just say we were able to ship Geometry Wars as the beginning of XBLA. 2006, we got Robotron, we got Lumines, things were going great. But something else happened. In 2007, I was asked to run XBLA. We pulled it from the platform team over to First Party Studios. First thing I did was ask them to show me everything that was under development, and more importantly, the things that they were getting ready to consider signing, and these games came up. So they're like, hey, Toe Soldiers, Trials HD, Shadow Complex, can we please do those? They were over the memory limit of XBLA at the time. The budgets were bigger than we were spending. I just went and talked to Phil and John. They love games. It was like, okay, you can go try this with a couple big games. But there was another problem in XBLA, discovery. Nobody could find it. And I don't mean discovery in terms of there were too many games available. I mean, it was hidden on this blade. We had like less than 20% of people even knew it was there. So I sat down with a bunch of people around the org, and we came up with this idea. What if you put the best XBLA games front and center on the shell at the time of year when there's not a lot of disc games available? So begat Summer of Arcade. Sorry. This is Summer of Arcade over the next several years. XBLA, I think most of you know what it did. But there were a few other highlights during the times of XBLA. There's the one that got away. We had GoldenEye at about 80% done. Yeah, lawyers. But at least we got to do Perfect Dark, 60 frames a second, split screen. You can still play it today on Rare Replay or on Back and Pat. That same developer that did Perfect Dark for us also did Banjo and Banjo-Tooie. They were 4J, actually from Dundee, where Dave Jones is. And I was going to Dundee all the time, so I got to meet the 4J guys. And lo and behold, we made a deal to do Minecraft for XBLA. When I accepted, hey, I'll do that talk. That'd be fun. That's my Minecraft city. I was like, I can show my Minecraft city to a bunch of people? Awesome. So yeah, too many, like over 1 million blocks. I'm a maniac. I play too much. I own thousands of games. And of course, we got World of Tanks, which is very different than when we were thinking about Robotron. So why did we do XBLA? Obviously, we wanted to open up development for people like you, for people like me, people that have been in the game industry for a while and wanted to move into other things. But when you start thinking about open, XBLA was still through a publisher model. So at the same time, starting in 2006, we came up with XNA. Hey, let's take this idea of you can just make games and launch them onto a platform yourself. All these things, I think, led to this timeline of many people doing games across many digital distribution platforms, obviously some of them being incredibly successful. I thought XBLA was good. It's obviously not the App Store, et cetera, et cetera. But I was proud when I looked back and it was like, oh, Steam, actually, the first game that shipped on Steam digital only was Gary's Mod. I was surprised that it came out that far back, before XBLA. But really, we were digital until PSN came. We were one of the only places you could get digital distribution games in one place. I mentioned earlier discovery. To close my talk, I just want to point out we have this problem today of this is Wednesday, and hundreds of games come out. I have owned thousands of games, but I can never find the game that I want to play on a Wednesday. I have to go to other sources, because when I go to the store, it tells me stuff like this. Hey, people also bought this game that I already own on another platform. Why would I care? You may also like this game that I've already played. Why would I care? People like you, how many people have over 5,000 games? So it's like curation is the thing that I think needs to be attacked as the industry moves forward. It's the 30th year of GDC-ish, and I'm super happy about that. I'm hoping that by the 60th GDC, maybe this will be resolved and perfect and we're all living in a perfectly curated VR world. That's too long. I'll probably be dead. How about we go for the 35th, because that's when I'll be 60, still making games, still playing games every day, and still loving GDC. So thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Hello. So 2004 saw the launch of a social networking site called the Facebook, but it took us about 5 years for games as we know them to appear on the platform. In early 2009, a game called Farmtown came out, but in June, after 6 weeks of development, a strikingly similar game came out that garnered over 10,000 players in just a few days. By 2010, that number had increased to 32 million a day, and at its peak, roughly 1 in 4 people on Facebook were playing Farmville. This was by and large the era of social games. If the Wii proved that grandparents wanted to play games, Facebook proved that a middle-aged mom could spend just as many hours on them as the prototypical 18-year-old boy, provided that they proved interesting to her. New types of content and entirely new genres flourished. Farming games, restaurant managers, and city builders became ubiquitous, earning monikers like Invest and Express for their highly visual progress markers, customizability, and social surfacing. We saw new manifestations for simulation games, hidden object games, and puzzle games, all with that same pick-up, put-down engagement style that fits so conveniently into a typical computer user's day. Even classic content and genres got an overhaul as the casual audience asserted its presence, permanently broadening our industry's player base. Fast-moving and adaptable startups thrived, and with them came new manifestations of monetization models. This was the start of free-to-play. Free-to-play, as we know it now, relies on a small fraction of players actually spending money as compared to earlier subscription or arcade models. And this meant that acquisition and engagement were paramount. Time and attention became our economic keystones, and nowhere was the battle for them more raw and apparent than Facebook feeds. Even if you weren't playing them, social games were everywhere, fueled by the virality only possible on a platform like Facebook. Lost cows, wandering stallions, and motherless pandas begged for homes. Players panhandled for builders, mares, nails, and Candy Crush lives, some of them without even intending to. These dark design trends were commonplace, with devs releasing features as fast as Facebook could update their terms of service to ban them. This tension between a quality platform and the insatiable need for new and lapsed players manifested in a tumultuous legal battle, an uneasy but short-lived partnership between Facebook and Zynga. Within our industry, social games were constantly lambasted as being anything but social. Friends and connections were just another form of currency, illustrated not just by our mechanics, but fan pages littered in nothing more than "add me" spam. There were notable exceptions, like Area Code's Parking Wars, that relied on actual interpersonal dynamics. And some incredible social efforts were made possible by highly engaged Facebook communities. Still, this alleged vapidness inspired criticism in many forms, even if some became as inescapable as their targets. Social games also changed the way we talk about games, introducing a dialect of acronyms like DAO, MAO, DARPs, ARPU, DARPU, DARPOOPOO, ARPDAO, D2, D7, D30, NPS, LTV, CTA, CTR, and CVR, just to name a few. Now, most of those, of course, were metrics. Hand in hand with the rise of live services came the real-time feedback loop of data. Suddenly, live dashboards polka-dotted office walls. They showed engagement and monetization to the minute, live feeds of Twitter and Facebook comments, and warning thresholds for day-over-day and week-over-week performance. Data also stormed the gates of what had long been an intuitive design discipline, making commonplace the data analyst, the UX researcher, and the SQL-savvy product manager. There they are. Armed with A/B tests and action-by-action tracking, teams could optimize their funnels, increase conversion, and see the startling differences between what players say and what they actually do. In the same year of Roger Ebert's infamous essay against games as an art form, social devs were turning them into psych experiments. With quantifiable data came a world of behavioral analytics, exemplified in the gamification fad. Data showed massive engagement increases from mechanics like leaderboards and badges, which were then repackaged and sold as silver bullets for engagement across every other industry. Most were superficial adaptations that rarely went beyond Skinnerbox's 101 and dopamine loops. It's only recently that companies are starting to focus on higher levels of human psychology and principles of motivation. By and large, those early endeavors did see a swift rise. But as novelty wore off, players noticed underlying patterns that suddenly felt a bit too empty in their rewards or too greedy for their time, leading to fallout or worse, as those badges had co-opted players' original intrinsic motivation to play. At the same time, in 2012, a mere 3 years after Farmville's launch, Facebook had tightened its control and relegated players to increasingly narrow niches of its site. With acquisition numbers decimated, the big boom of social games came to a close. Though we continue to live in its free-to-play legacy, players, by and large, are turning attention to the always-ready handheld haven of their phones, leaving Facebook for the birds. Thank you.
Hey, my name's Luke. I love making mobile games. I'm going to talk to you about smartphone games today. So when I got asked to do this talk, I thought, well, you can get a lot of things done in 5 minutes, but it's going to be pretty hard to get from here, where we were in 2008, to here, where we are today. So rather than doing a history lesson about all that sort of stuff, I'm going to do 2 stories. I'm going to talk about some big things and some small things. Let's talk about some big things first, like really big, crazy, scary numbers. There are over 19,000 games submitted just to the App Store in January. Even if you're hyper pessimistic and you say only 0.1% of those games are any good, that's still a lot of games, a lot of really, really good games. With so many games, it's really hard to get everyone's attention. You got to come up with all kinds of crazy marketing ideas like viral videos, subliminal messages, all sorts of stuff. But lucky for us, there are a lot of players as well, a crazy amount of players. So let's have a look at some of those. Alpha Bear is a fantastic game. It came out fairly recently. It's a word game, and they've already had 650 million words spelled. That's like 14 Encyclopedia Britannicas. But there's bigger games than this. Let's look at Crossy Road. So we've done a whole bunch of maths on this. Trying to look at how many chickens have been hit by cars historically is just like nonsense. The numbers don't even make sense. So this is a real-time representation of how many chickens are being hit by cars right now. This is how many people are playing Crossy Road right now. It's absolutely insane. It's even bigger if we look at something like Fruit Ninja. The number of fruit sliced looks something like this. Absolutely off the charts. When we made Fruit Ninja, we were planning on having a huge party when we hit 1 million fruit sliced. The very first time we looked, we had 227 million fruit sliced. We did our best, but there were no photos I could share from that party. And here's a really interesting one. Let's have a look at how much money Clash Royale is making real time. Roughly, something like that. And with all of these big numbers, we've had other stuff like, there's hitting the world stage, big leaders playing the games, even fake big leaders playing our games. And, huge numbers, these huge scandals, all kinds of stuff. But luckily, we have good stuff in there too, like big ideas on how games can actually improve our lives. But now I want to talk about some small things, because I feel like the small things don't get nearly enough attention. And this is the stuff that I'm really excited about, the small things that it means for developers. And I don't mean like some developers get crazy rich and others get really poor. So I have this story that I know a lot of other mobile devs can relate to. Even though it's my story, I'm telling it on their behalf. So I grew up on a farm. This is actually my mum's farm. It is like living inside a postcard. It's ridiculous. It was not even almost a tech-savvy environment. So when I left and I went to the big city to learn how to make games, my family was super supportive. Like they really supported me, but they didn't really understand what I was doing. And then I eventually got a job. I made a bunch of shitty games, and they were really games that my family couldn't play. And I would come back and talk about it. And again, they were super supportive, but they just can't relate to what I was doing. Couldn't really connect with it, and I actually stopped talking so much about what I do. And this is really sad because, like a lot of people here, I'm sure, making games is a huge part of who I am. And then something changed. iPhone came out, App Store launched, and all of a sudden we started making games for things that everybody had in their pockets. And so because everyone had it in their pockets, we were trying to make games for everyone, stuff that anyone could play. And the big thing that changed was now we had accessible technology, accessible games, and this actually made the critique and discussion and discourse about games, game design, and all of this accessible, and more people can talk about it. And now making games is something that we get to share with our families. These are all photos that people had sent in to me. You know, kids making ideas, like family playtesting the games, getting involved, talking about what makes games good, what makes them bad, and our families are now a part of this industry that we love so much. And more than anything, it's meant I've been able to share my passion for my craft and this industry that I love so much with the people that I love so much. Thanks so much and have an awesome GDC.
Hello, everybody. My name's Tim Schaefer. I'm here to tell you the story of where money comes from, specifically crowdfunding. But before crowdfunding, the story of where money came from looked a little different. When a publisher and developer loved each other very much, do a special kind of hug. The publisher would give developer money, and that money would be magically turned by the developer into a game, and the game would go back to the publisher to be sold to players, and the players would give their money back to the publisher, and the publisher would split it equally with the developer, and everyone was happy for everyone. No one ever complained, and it worked perfectly. There are actually a couple of I'll call them friction points at that model. And the publisher was risking a lot of money. They didn't know the developer was going to flake out on them or what was going to happen. So they would make sure that all the money went to them until they got paid back for their investment. They would pay back themselves for the cost of developing the game, but also the marketing, the distribution, and a lot of the costs the developer couldn't see or didn't have any control over. And also, they didn't recoup at all the money that came in from the players didn't go to recoup that investment. It would recoup at the royalty rate often, and so if you made $4, $1 would go back to paying back the debt, and the other $3 would go off into a mysterious world I don't know much about. And so the game would have to make its money back many, many times in order for the developer to see any money. And Double Fine went through this process, that's my company, many times, which reminds me of another fun thing about the old model is that the publisher could, for no reason at all, cancel your game just out of the blue, which made things a little unstable for developers. So around 2010, I got an email from the fiery head of Brandon Boyer introducing me to Andy Bio, the CTO of Kickstarter at the time, saying, hey, we have this thing, and we think it would be a great idea for you to use to fund your next game. And I very intelligently asked the smartest question I could, which was, what's Kickstarter? And I went to our business guy, and I said, do you know what Kickstarter is? And he's like, this is an actual quote. I saved this email because it was pivotal. He's like, it's a crowdfunding model. I've seen it work for small games like 50K, but it's completely impractical for something on the scale. So we didn't do it. We didn't use crowdfunding, and we kept trudging on that traditional model for a while. But here's what, in 2010 and 2000, here's what Kickstarter really was. It's founded in 2009. It's a crowdfunding platform created to fund many projects in many categories, dance, music, film, etc. The very first video game to ever use Kickstarter, as far as I know, is called High Strangeness. Steve Jenkins asked for $1,500 to make his game. He got that, and plus an extra $60 for his trouble. So that's the first game. And this actually, last year, actually shipped on Steam. You can actually get this game. It's got disaster piece music. It's awesome. So other early crowdfunding titles are Fly Wrench and Resonance, also both shipped. And Zombies Run. I think this is the biggest one at the time, 72,000. And then it wasn't until 2012 that we tried crowdfunding for ourselves. We were approached by Two Player Productions, a documentary film crew, and they wanted to do a documentary about game development. And they wanted to kickstart it. They kickstarted their Minecraft documentary, and they wanted to use it again. And I thought that was a great idea, because I love attention. And but I was worried that if we went with a publisher, they wouldn't want to tell the whole story. I've always wanted to tell the story of how games are actually developed and the blood, sweat, and tears that go into it. But I thought that might be bad PR, and publishers wouldn't want us to do that, so we should crowdfund the game itself. And so we did it. We launched a campaign. We asked for $300,000 to make a small game and $100,000 to make the documentary, which is still terrifying if you think about the last biggest number that was crowdfunded. We were like, oh, it's going to be so embarrassing when we don't make that. But it worked out. It worked out really well. It was awesome. It was a huge success, and I got to tell you, it felt really good. We had the money to make the game, but we didn't need to worry about a publisher canceling our game, and all we had to worry about was making a great game for these new bosses that we had, the backers. Except it felt natural because the players are always your bosses, they always have been. So I love crowdfunding, and it worked great for Broken Age, so we did it again with Massive Chalice, and it was great to get that money, but the really great thing was this new energized community that was a long-lasting benefit of that campaign. A huge wave of love and support came our way, and it keeps us going to this very day. It's like, jumping ahead of myself. It was like having 90,000 people out on the internet having your backs, and it's great. So going directly to players for funding does have some unique challenges. All that passion that they bring to support your game can quickly turn into rage if there are any problems, and as those of you who make games know, there's always problems. So seeing how the sausage gets made is a new experience and confusing for a lot of players, but I think over time there'll be greater empathy and understanding as developers continue the trend to more transparency, which goes hand in hand with crowdfunding. So one thing that always nagged at me is, what if I get rich? Bingo, there it is. I haven't had to worry about this yet, but it's happened to friends of mine. It's kind of scary. So what about all the people who helped you get there? What about the people without whom you couldn't have made your game? If you make a lot of money, what about them? Isn't there some way to give them a cut? And at the very start of our crowdfunding adventure, I went and I asked everyone if this was possible, and they told me no. In fact, it's not possible at all. That's technically an investment, which is specifically prohibited by the crowdfunding platforms. And also, it's heavily regulated by the SEC. This is a big problem. But since then, the Jobs Act has changed and allowed this kind of unaccredited investment to happen. So we were able to found a new crowdfunding platform called Fig that we use to fund Psychonauts 2, and the Fig lets us have the normal kinds of rewards that all crowdfunding campaigns have, but also share our rewards with the profit of the game with the backers. So that was really exciting, and that was our most successful campaign to date. But crowdfunding has been democratizing investment and funding for the arts all over. It's allowed creative people to pursue projects that probably wouldn't have existed any other way. It hasn't completely replaced the old model of funding games, but it's provided an alternative which has helped make more of these deals more developer friendly. So crowdfunding has changed the landscape in games and other media, and it's been overall a great force for good, and it's definitely here to stay. So thanks everybody for listening, and thanks for backing.
Hi, my name is Seth Killian. I'm a co-founder of the Evolution Championship Series, better known as EVO. For those who don't know, it's a fighting game tournament, and it has extremely humble beginnings. It was basically a couple dozen of us in an arcade about 30 miles south of where we're sitting. Since that beginning, EVO has grown every single year since its inception. With no outside investors, no marketing, it's become the largest fighting game tournament in the world and one of the largest events on the entire esports landscape. How is this possible under those conditions? In my mind, it's very simple. It's only through the passion of the players. So through their drive, their dedication, and the really, truly deep bonds that form through the experiences you have at these things, I've come to believe very firmly that player passion is really the atomic element that powers all of esports. I grew up with that as a player myself, and I'm privileged to live it today as a developer. The history of esports is as long as the history of video games, basically, and filled with too many amazing moments across too many amazing games to recount in just a few minutes here today. So instead, I want to use my time to tell you why I'm so excited for the future. Although the success of esports to date has been built on things like the internet, the spread of broadband, and new broadcast platforms like Twitch, in my view, the most exciting new development doesn't really come from a technology. It comes from a shift in the way we think about the games themselves. It's a new way of looking at the passion that players bring to the game and the efforts to align your interests as a developer as closely as possible with your players and basically to understand you're in it together. I call this shift the invention of the esports hyperdrive. By building deep competitive games that let players invest time and money in a way that scale with their interests. So if you don't really like it, you don't really put a lot of money into it, cool, but the people that really love it can keep finding ways to engage. You can shift your profits away from marketing and invest back into the things your players really most want to see and trust in them to spread the word. I think this isn't simply a business model or games as a service. To me, it's an act of faith. It's faith in the depth of your game, faith in the endurance and reach of your players' passion. While many competitive games have been successful, it's the games using the hyperdrive that have pushed things forward in really a crazy new way. Games that pair their interests as a developer with the interests of the players have resulted in unprecedented long-term growth, basically defying everything the industry thought about sales curves and player engagement. So this is growth not simply as a gaming franchise with a bunch of games across years. It's growth within a single game. And instead of a big marketing launch followed by, the standard slowly declining player base, since the advent of the hyperdrive, we've seen single games that are able to continue to grow long after launch, and in some cases even accelerate their growth years after launch, which is, something we've just never seen before. The nice part about it is it creates an entirely new level of stability for the entire surrounding ecosystem, all of which feeds back into the game's success. And for the first time, this level of stability is turning video games from an entertainment into a way of life. It makes it possible for players to invest in the games in new, deeper, and even potentially lifelong ways. I think we may be witnessing the beginning of a shift in the lifespan of single video games from a few months or years, if you're lucky, to things more like a decade, and potentially even longer. For someone who believes very deeply in the power, promise, and potential of these games, I gotta say, this is just it's an exciting time. The history of esports, in my view, is the history of players trying to escape the gravity of a constantly changing landscape and attain a stable competitive orbit, to find regularity that rewards our skills and the financial backing to produce a stable world of competition. And this effort came first from the players themselves, later from independent tournament organizations, and today from the developers themselves. These developers, armed with the esports hyperdrive, can turn their player support expenditures into a true investment, an investment in their game, an investment in the future, and the shared project between developer and competitive player. My favorite part about this is that the hyperdrive is still a totally recent invention. This is a new thing. It's a young technology. And different people are building their own versions of the hyperdrive across developers and across genres. So it's my belief that the atomic element that powers the whole thing, that player passion, combined with the power of the hyperdrive, it's really the discovery of a new, renewable energy source in the gaming universe. And as we improve it and harness the power of its positive feedback loop together, there are no more limits to how far we can go. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Palmer. I'm the founder of Oculus. Virtual reality at this GDC is probably the biggest it's ever been. In fact, there's probably more virtual reality on display here at this year's GDC than there has been at maybe the previous 29 GDCs combined. I think GDC actually had to move a lot of the virtual reality talks to a new venue to double their capacity because there were so many people who were interested. Things haven't always been like that. A few years ago, really nobody believed in virtual reality. In fact, I believe there's probably a sizable number of you who still don't believe in virtual reality, and that's okay. I think that you're going to be proven wrong, and you're going to have to eat your words pretty fast, but that's what I tell myself every night. But I really do think that when you look around, you see so many people today that a year ago weren't thinking about VR, and certainly 2 or 3 years ago weren't thinking about VR. 3 years ago, it was a very brave few people who were willing to go out and start making games for virtual reality and experimenting. And now it seems like everybody's doing it. Everyone's either experimenting with VR or at least thinking about virtual reality. I'm at somewhat of a disadvantage to many of the other people who are speaking. They're able to go back and tell you about what's worked in the games industry, what hasn't, some of the incredible changes that have happened over the years. I, on the other hand, am 23 years old, and this is my third GDC, barely. So I can't actually tell you what's going to work in virtual reality. I can't give you insight into, deep insight into what worked in the past. Really, the only thing that I can tell you is what's kind of how this is kind of starting and how this is starting to evolve. So the good news is there's lots of people working on VR, and this isn't just one set of teams. It used to be that a lot of times the people who would invest in a major console launch or something would be companies that could afford to invest in, or people who are able to get money from publishers. We started out as a Kickstarted company, and a lot of the developers we work with have similarly humble or even more humble beginnings. We're working with tiny devs like Carbon Games all the way up to people like Insomniac and Ubisoft. And I think that's because everyone sees the promise of virtual reality. Is it not working? So I think it's going to be really interesting to see this industry evolve, and it's going to be interesting to see what the successes are. And I wish I could come up on this stage and tell you virtual reality is going to change everything, and it's all going to be for the better, and nobody is going to fail, and you're going to make so much money if you get into virtual reality. The actual truth is that, like I said earlier, we don't know how things are going to play out. We know that there are going to be a lot of successes, but it's likely that there's also going to be a lot of failures. And that's really the same of anyone else in the games industry. I think right now there's a lot of optimism, and as of now, the rubber hasn't hit the road, and so nobody's really had to fail. It's going to be interesting to see how the games industry continues to evolve based on the things that have happened, that have already happened. Things like crowdfunding, new publishing models, new funding models, new game engine technology, new hardware technology, things that enable games to actually be very different from what they've been in the past. Because I feel like for a long time, games were a little bit in a rut. And I don't say this as a game developer. Remember, I'm a really young guy. This is just as a gamer, I felt like things were really stuck in a rut. The games coming out every year were roughly the same as the games that came out the year before. The last few years, that has not been the case. We've seen radical changes in everything, whether esports, which we've talked about, digital distribution of games, mobile, and I think now augmented reality and virtual reality gaming technology. What I'm hoping is that I get to keep working with developers and I get to keep working with people who are doing, so that someday I will also be as old as the other guys on stage. And I'll be able to come back here and tell you what worked and what didn't, and what was successful and what wasn't. And I'll be able to tell you how the people that are here at GDC made virtual reality successful and kept pushing the games industry forward. And I'm going to have gray hair. Thank you.
Everybody, thank you so much for coming. Don't forget to come back tonight at 6:30 in this room for the IGF and Game Developers Choice Awards. Now the expo floor is open, sessions are starting. Go enjoy GDC. Thank you.